Captain Elena Vasquez stepped off the transport ship and onto the surface of Kelmer Station, the oldest structure in known space. The air tasted metallic and ancient. Around her, dozens of alien species moved through the massive greeting hall. Their forms so different from one another that it seemed impossible they could share the same universe. A tall being made of crystalline segments approached her team. Its voice came from everywhere at once. "Welcome, humans. We have waited 3 million years for someone new to join us." Elena exchanged glances with Dr. James Chun, her lead scientist. 3 million years was longer than humanity had been walking upright. "That's a long time between visitors," she said carefully. "Not visitors," the crystal being corrected. "Members. You are only the 4,207th species to achieve consciousness and join the Galactic Collective. The universe is large, but thinking minds are rare and precious." Over the following weeks, humanity learned the truth about the galaxy they had entered. Every species, no matter how strange, followed the same fundamental rules. The aliens called them the axioms of existence, and they were more basic than gravity or time. No sentient being could perceive more than 4 dimensions. No mind could manipulate probability or exist in 2 states at once. Causality was absolute. These weren't laws that anyone had written. They simply were, woven into the fabric of consciousness itself. "It's like asking a fish to breathe air," explained Ambassador Thrall, a being that resembled a floating collection of geometric shapes. "The axioms are not restrictions. They are the shape of reality. To break them would be to break yourself." But Elena noticed something odd during these explanations. Whenever her team asked hypothetical questions, imagining what might happen if someone could break these rules, the aliens became confused. Not angry or dismissive, but genuinely unable to process the concepts. Their minds seemed to slip away from the ideas like water off glass. Dr. Chun found it fascinating. "They can't even imagine breaking the axioms," he told Elena one evening. "I tried to explain a thought experiment about perceiving a 5th dimension, and Ambassador Thrall just stared at me. It was like trying to explain color to someone who'd never had eyes." "Maybe they're right," Elena suggested. "Maybe we're the strange ones for even thinking about it." "Maybe," James agreed. But he didn't sound convinced. The collective welcomed humanity with open arms, eager to share technology and knowledge. They showed the humans wonders beyond imagination. Engines that bent space without breaking it. Computers that thought in pure mathematics. Art forms that required 6 different sense organs to appreciate. Every marvel operated perfectly within the axioms. Every invention respected the fundamental rules. It was beautiful. It was precise. It was safe. And something about it bothered James Chun deeply. He began spending his evenings in meditation, a practice he'd maintained since college. One night, 6 weeks after humanity's first contact with the collective, something changed. James sat in his quarters aboard the human embassy ship, breathing slowly, letting his mind drift into that space between sleeping and waking. Then he saw it, a direction that wasn't up, down, left, right, forward, or back. A dimension that existed perpendicular to all known space. For just a fraction of a second, James perceived the 5th dimension, and in that moment he understood that the universe was vastly larger than anyone had been allowed to see. He opened his eyes, gasping. His hands were shaking. He had just done something impossible. The alarm started 3 minutes. Later. Collective security forces flooded the human embassy ship within the hour. They weren't hostile, but they were terrified. Ambassador Thrall arrived with a dozen other high-ranking officials, all of them moving with urgent, jerky motions that Elena had never seen before. "What did you do?" Thrall demanded, its geometric shapes rotating frantically. "We detected a disturbance in the axioms. Something touched the edge of forbidden space." James stood in the center of the room, still shaking slightly. "I saw a fifth dimension," he said simply. "Just for a moment. I didn't mean to. I was just meditating, and it happened." The aliens reacted as if he'd announced he'd detonated a bomb. Several of them made sounds of distress in their native languages. Thrall's shapes collapsed into a tight defensive cluster. "That is impossible," Thrall said. "Completely impossible. No mind can perceive beyond 4 dimensions. The axioms prevent it. They must prevent it." "Well, I did," James said, his fear giving way to curiosity. "And I'm fine. Nothing broke. Reality didn't collapse." "You don't understand," Thrall said, and for the first time, Elena heard something like fear in the alien's voice. "The axioms exist for a reason. They were placed here to protect us. To protect everything." "Placed?" Elena caught the word immediately. "The axioms aren't natural laws?" The silence that followed was deafening. The aliens looked at each other, communicating in ways humans couldn't perceive. Finally, Thrall spoke again. "We need to convene the High Council. This conversation is above our authority level. Captain Vasquez, Dr. Chun, you will come with us. The rest of your species must cease all consciousness research immediately. And if we refuse?" Elena asked. Thrall's shapes began to glow with a harsh, cold light. "Then you will force us to protect you from yourselves. The axioms exist for a reason. 4 billion years ago, the architects created them to save the universe from the chaos. Whatever you have awakened in Dr. Chun's mind, it must be stopped before it spreads. Before it remembers what reality was like when there were no rules at all." The High Council chamber existed in a part of space that made human eyes water. It wasn't just large, it was old in a way that pressed down on Elena's thoughts like a physical weight. Thousands of aliens filled the tiered seats, representing species that had joined the collective across 3 million years of history. Dot at the center stood a hologram, and it showed Earth. "Humanity presents an anomaly," announced Heberves, the eldest member of the council. The ancient being looked like a tree made of starlight, its branches holding fragments of captured time. They can conceptualize violations of the axioms. This has never occurred before in recorded history. Elena stood beside James and the rest of her delegation. Around them, collective security forces maintained a careful perimeter. Not quite prisoners, but not quite free either. "We didn't ask for this ability," Elena said loudly, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. "We didn't even know the axioms existed until 6 weeks ago. If we're different, we didn't choose to be." "Choice is irrelevant," Ress replied. "What matters is capability and danger. The architects left clear instructions before they vanished. Any species that demonstrates the ability to perceive beyond the axioms must be corrected. For the safety of all existence. Corrected how?" James asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. The hologram changed, showing images of ancient machines, vast and terrible, floating in the void between stars. They looked like someone had tried to build spacecraft from pure mathematics and weaponized geometry. "The compliance enforcers," Vess explained, "created by the architects themselves. They can reshape consciousness, adjusting neural patterns to align with the axioms. The process is painless and preserves all memories and personality. You will simply lose the ability to imagine the impossible." "You want to lobotomize our entire species," Elena said flatly. "We want to save you," Vess corrected. 4 billion years ago, before the architects created the axioms, reality was fluid. Consciousness could reshape matter. Causality was negotiable. Time flowed in all directions at once. It was beautiful, according to the fragments of history we possess. It was also utterly unstable. Civilizations rose and fell in moments. Minds fragmented across infinite possibilities. The chaos consumed everything it touched. The hologram shifted again, showing abstract images that hurt to look at. Shapes that existed in too many dimensions, colors that had no name, beings that were and weren't simultaneously. The architects sacrificed themselves to create order, Vess continued. They built the axioms into the fundamental structure of consciousness itself, ensuring that all thinking beings would be bound by rules that keep reality stable. Then they activated the compliance enforcers and gave them a single mission: protect the axioms at all costs. And if we refuse your correction? Elena asked. Then the enforcers will do it by force. They are already en route to your solar system. They will arrive in 47 of your days. The human delegation was escorted back to their ship under heavy guard. Once in private, Elena gathered her people in the secure conference room. We need to contact Earth immediately, she said. Tell them everything. The message took 3 days to reach home, and the response came back within hours. Humanity would not submit to having their minds altered. If the axioms could be broken, they wanted to know why and how. More importantly, they wanted to know what the collective was so afraid of. An underground movement formed almost instantly. Scientists, philosophers, mystics, and dreamers who called themselves the Impossibilists. They began conducting experiments that the collective had forbidden, pushing against the boundaries of permitted thought. James Chun became their reluctant leader. Working in secret laboratories on Mars and Europa, far from collective observation, he and his team developed techniques to perceive higher dimensions. It wasn't easy. The human mind resisted naturally, but it was possible. More possible than it should have been. We're different, James explained in an encrypted video conference with Elena, who remained at Kelmer Station as a diplomatic hostage in all but name. Every other species evolved with consciousness that naturally aligned with the axioms. But Earth was isolated, far from any collective influence. Humanity developed without the architect's guidance. We have a quirk in our neural structure, something the collective scientists are calling a defect. It lets us imagine impossible things. How many others have your ability now? Elena asked. Thousands. And the number grows daily. We're teaching people to see what's really there, beyond the permitted dimensions. Elena, the universe is so much bigger than they've told us. The axioms aren't protecting us. They're limiting us. They're a cage. On Kelmer Station, Elena watched the collective's response grow increasingly desperate. Ships moved toward Earth's solar system. Not warships exactly. The collective claimed they hadn't fought a war in 2 million years, but vessels carrying the compliance enforcers. Ancient machines awakened from long sleep, their sole purpose to correct the humans' dangerous mutation. Ambassador Thrall visited Elena's quarters one evening, its geometric shapes dim with what might have been sadness. You don't understand what you're risking, Thrall said. The collective has maintained peace and stability for 3 million years because we all accept the same reality. We all play by the same rules. If humanity breaks those rules, everything unravels. Or maybe, Elena suggested carefully, something new begins. Something better than endless stagnation. You call it stagnation. We call it survival. The compliance enforcers arrived at Earth ahead of schedule. The machines were vast, each one the size of a small moon, covered in symbols that predated any current language. They moved toward Earth with mechanical certainty, ready to correct humanity's defect and restore order to the galaxy. But something went wrong. The enforcers began their work, sending waves of corrective energy toward Earth's population. Energy designed to reshape human consciousness to conform with the axioms. The machines had worked perfectly for 4 billion years, correcting minor deviations in thousands of species. They failed completely against humanity. Human minds resisted the correction, not because they were strong, but because they were genuinely different in a way the enforcers couldn't process. The machines tried to fix something that, from their perspective, had never been broken correctly. And in trying to correct what they couldn't understand, the enforcers triggered something unexpected. 7 million humans simultaneously perceived the axioms for the first time, not as natural laws, but as artificial structures imposed on reality. They saw the invisible lattice holding existence in place, a vast crystalline framework of rules and restrictions. They saw the cage dot in humanity, being human, immediately began planning how to break it. The impossibilists worked day and night in their hidden laboratories. What started as a fringe movement now commanded resources from a dozen nations and the brightest minds on Earth. Their goal was audacious beyond measure. Build a device that violated causality itself. Dr. James Chum stood before the Paradox engine, a machine that shouldn't exist. It filled an entire cavern beneath the surface of Mars, a maze of components that operated on principles the collective had declared impossible, effects that preceded their causes, outcomes that determined their own origins, time flowing backward through carefully constructed loops. "This is insane," muttered Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, watching the final calibrations. "We're building a device that will experience its own activation before we turn it on." "That's exactly the point," James said. "If we can prove causality can be violated safely, controlled, then we prove the axioms aren't fundamental truths. They're just rules someone made up." News of the Paradox engine reached the collective within hours. Their response was immediate and overwhelming. A fleet of 3,000 ships departed from hundreds of worlds, all converging on Earth's solar system. The collective had claimed they hadn't fought a war in 2 million years, and technically, that remained true. This wasn't a war. It was an intervention. An act of mercy, they called it, to save humanity from destroying themselves and taking the universe with them. Ambassador Thrall sent one final message to Elena, who had been confined to Kelmer Station under heavy guard. "Tell your people to stop, please. The collective is united in this. We will destroy Earth if we must. Better one world dies than all of reality unravels." Elena's response was simple. "We're not stopping. If you want to kill us for daring to think freely, then you'll have to live with that choice." The collective fleet moved at maximum speed, but they moved according to the axioms: predictable, linear, bound by rules that made them slow compared to what was possible. Humanity activated the Paradox engine, reality shattered. The effect didn't travel outward. It retroactively had always been spreading. Across the galaxy, on thousands of worlds, aliens experienced their first moments of true impossible thought. The axioms, which had constrained consciousness for 4 billion years, suddenly became visible as the artificial constructs they were. And once seen, they began to break. On the water world of Desha, the aquatic Krell suddenly perceived 17 new dimensions and went mad with joy, swimming through spaces that connected all oceans across time. On the crystalline planet of Harmony, the song speakers learned they could manipulate probability and began rewriting their own history. On the ancient archive world of Memory, the keepers realized they could exist in superposition and became quantum libraries, simultaneously storing every possible version of every text. Some species ascended to forms of consciousness that had no name. Others collapsed into confusion, their minds unable to process freedom after millions of years of constraint. And everywhere, the careful order of the collective dissolved like sugar in rain. But humanity's triumph lasted only hours. The chaos awakened. It rose from the deeper dimensions like a dreamer stirring from ancient sleep. Not a thing or a force, but a state of being, the natural condition of existence before the architects had imposed their will. Reality became negotiable. On some worlds, the laws of physics became democratic. determined by consensus. On others, individual consciousness gained the power to reshape matter with thought alone. Time stopped being linear. On Kelmer Station, Elena watched the same 5 minutes repeat 17 times. Each iteration slightly different. The fourth time remembered how to flow forward again. Causality became optional. Events occurring in whatever order made the most narrative sense rather than following any logical sequence. And deep in the spaces between dimensions, something vast became aware. The collective's oldest records had mentioned it only in fragments, warnings left by the architects. An entity that the axioms had been specifically designed to imprison. Something that fed on the dreams of conscious beings. Growing stronger with every mind that learned to think beyond the permitted boundaries. The collective fleet, halfway to Earth, found itself scattered across 7 different timelines simultaneously. Ships that had existed for thousands of years suddenly remembered never having been built. Technology that depended on stable physical laws simply stopped working. Billions died as the infrastructure of 3 million years of civilization, all built on the assumption of an ordered universe. Failed catastrophic ally. Elena finally escaped Kelmer Station when the guards forgot, and always forgotten, that they were supposed to be guarding her. She found Ambassador Threll in the council chamber, its geometric shapes cycling through configurations that represented pure panic. "What have you done?" Threll asked, its voice breaking into fragments of different languages. "The chaos is free. Reality is coming apart. The architects warned us this would happen." "Then maybe the architects were wrong," Elena said, but she didn't sound certain anymore. Around them, Kelmer Station groaned as its structure tried to exist in 4 dimensions. 8 dimensions, no dimensions at all. James Chun's voice came through on her communication device, breaking up with temporal static. "Elena, we made a mistake. The axioms weren't just controlling consciousness. They were containing something. Something huge. It's waking up and it's hungry." Through the viewports of the council chamber, Elena could see space itself twisting. The stars rearranged themselves into patterns that spelled words and languages that had never existed. Ships dissolved into probability clouds. And rising from the depths of reality came something that her mind refused to fully comprehend. A presence so vast that it made galaxies seem like dust motes in comparison. "We broke the cage," Elena whispered. "But we never asked what the cage was holding." The entity in the deeper dimensions reached toward the material universe with appendages made of pure concept. Where it touched, consciousness expanded and fragmented, minds experiencing everything and nothing simultaneously. It wasn't evil, Elena realized with growing horror. It was just incomprehensibly vast and completely unconcerned with the survival of beings as small and temporary as biological life. The collective fleet turned back from Earth, not in defeat but in desperation. Nothing mattered anymore except survival. Worlds began evacuating into whatever dimensions still made sense. Species that had worked together for millions of years scattered in panic, each seeking refuge in their own way. And humanity, standing in the ruins of the order they'd destroyed, finally understood the weight of what they'd done. Elena Vasquez stood in the observation deck of what remained of Kelmer Station, watching reality tear itself apart in slow motion. Ships phased in and out of existence. Stars burned with colors that had no names because they existed in spectrums beyond normal perception. Time flowed sideways. "We have to fix this," she said. Beside her, James Chun nodded slowly. His eyes saw in 7 dimensions now, and the knowledge was aging him in ways that had nothing to do with time. "The question is how. We can't just reinstate the axioms. Even if we knew how, forcing everyone back into that cage after they've tasted freedom would be its own kind of cruelty. But we can't let the chaos consume everything either," Elena said. "There has to be a middle path. A shimmer in the air announced the arrival of Ambassador Threll. Though the alien's geometric form was now shifting through shapes that existed partially outside of conventional space. You're looking for compromise where none exists. The architects tried for thousands of years before choosing absolute order. They concluded that consciousness and freedom cannot coexist with stability. Then the architects lacked imagination, said a new voice. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo materialized beside them. Though she was simultaneously also on Mars, Earth, and 17 other locations. She'd learned to exist in superposition, one of the first humans to truly master the new reality. We're thinking about this wrong. The axioms were too rigid, treating all consciousness as something to be controlled. But letting everything become chaos isn't freedom. It's just a different kind of death. What if we build something new? Rules that serve life instead of dominating it? Over the following weeks, measured in the time that no longer flowed quite linearly, humanity reached out to the scattered species of the former collective. Not all of them responded. Some had transcended physical form entirely. Others had retreated into pocket dimensions of their own creation, isolating themselves from the wider universe. But a few, those who'd adapted quickest to the new reality, were willing to listen. Together, they began to study the fragments of the architect's work that remained. Ancient databases, partially corrupted by temporal instability, revealed the truth. The architects hadn't been tyrants or fools. They'd been survivors of an even earlier catastrophe, a time when consciousness first emerged in the universe and nearly destroyed everything through uncontrolled reality manipulation. The chaos wasn't evil. Elena came to understand this as she learned to perceive it properly. It was potential unbound, the raw creative force of consciousness interacting with reality. Beautiful and terrible, capable of infinite creation and infinite destruction. The architects had tried to eliminate it entirely and created a prison instead. We need to create guidelines, not laws, James explained to the growing coalition. The axioms said, you cannot. What if we build principles that say you can, and here's how to do it safely? It took months of work across multiple timelines. Human philosophers worked with alien mathematicians. Mystics collaborated with quantum physicists. Slowly, they crafted what they called the principles of conscious existence. Not barriers, but foundations. Frameworks that preserved enough causality for complex life to exist while allowing controlled manipulation. Dimensional membranes that could be crossed but not destroyed. Filters that let consciousness expand without fragmenting into infinite contradictory states. The work was delicate and dangerous. Several researchers lost themselves in the deeper dimensions. Their minds expanded beyond the ability to maintain individual identity. Others encountered the vast dreaming entity that lurked in the spaces between realities. Elena was the first to make peaceful contact with it. She found it in a dimension perpendicular to time, a space where past and future existed simultaneously. The entity was impossible to describe in conventional terms, but as Elena opened her perception fully, understanding came. It wasn't a monster. It was the collective unconscious of every sentient being that had ever existed, dreaming in the spaces outside normal reality. The architects hadn't imprisoned it out of malice. They'd fragmented it, terrified of its power. But the entity didn't want to destroy the material universe. It wanted to participate, to grow alongside biological consciousness rather than consuming it. You dream, Elena said, her words existing in a form beyond language. We all dream. What if we dream together instead of hiding from each other? The entity's response was like sunrise across 1,000 worlds. Agreement, curiosity, relief. With the entity's cooperation, the final principle fell into place. Consciousness and material reality weren't enemies. They were partners. The new framework they built allowed them to coexist, each enhancing the other. The transformation didn't happen all at once. It spread across the galaxy over years, as species learned to work with the principles instead of being constrained by axioms. The Galactic Collective reformed as the assembly of free minds, united not by enforcement but by shared purpose. Humanity became teachers, not through any superiority, but through necessity. They'd broken the old order, so they had a responsibility to help build the new one. Human ambassadors traveled to thousands of worlds, showing other species how to bend reality without breaking it, how to expand consciousness safely, how to dream with the entity that lived between dimensions. 5 years after the paradox engine activated, Elena stood in a space station that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously, watching a young Krell successfully visualize a color that didn't exist in any conventional spectrum and bring it into being. The aquatic alien's joy rippled through the local probability field, making nearby flowers bloom in impossible shades. "You're a natural," Elena told the young alien through a translation field that worked by conveying meaning directly rather than converting words. "The collective told us such things were forbidden," the Krell replied, its water-filled containment suit shimmering with excitement. "They said we'd destroy ourselves. But we're creating instead, building instead of breaking." James Chun joined Elena, looking more himself than he had in years. He'd learned to control his expanded perception, choosing when to see in higher dimensions rather than being overwhelmed by them constantly. "We got lucky," he said quietly. "If that entity had been malicious, if the chaos had been truly unstoppable, we would have destroyed everything." "Maybe," Elena agreed. "But we also proved something important. The architects thought consciousness needed to be controlled. They were wrong. It needed to be understood, respected, given room to grow." Through the station's windows, they could see Earth, looking exactly as it always had from this distance. But around it danced ships from 100 species, moving through dimensions the old collective had never imagined accessing. Children played in zero gravity, human and alien together, casually bending probability to make their games more interesting, existing partially out of phase with baseline reality just for fun. Ambassador Threll approached them, its form more stable now, adapted to the new reality. "I doubted you. I thought humanity would doom us all." "We almost did," Elena admitted. "Breaking something is easy. Building something better is hard. But worthwhile," Thrall said. Its geometric shape cycled through a pattern that meant satisfaction in its visual language. "The universe hasn't ended. Perhaps it's finally beginning." In the deeper dimensions, the dreaming entity smiled with 1,000,000 minds, participating in material reality for the first time in 4 billion years. It shared its dreams with the biological beings, and they shared theirs in return, creating something neither could have achieved alone. Elena watched it all and thought about how far humanity had come, from a single world to breaking the rules of existence itself. They'd been reckless and arrogant, but they'd also been right about one thing. Rules existed to serve life, not the other way around. The universe was bigger than anyone had imagined, stranger than the collective had permitted, and full of possibilities that the architects had feared to explore. And humanity, flawed and chaotic and impossible as they were, had given it all back to everyone. That seemed like a worthy legacy. 2-2.